You're listening to Hope 103.1 FM. Keep it locked.
Oh, Jesus.
Good vibes.
Me never could have changed my mind. My Father is the most I got, so no matter try waste my time. If I know God, you know me not do it.
Godly energy. You are listening to Hope 103.1 FM Grenada.
Things in the triune deity, God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit. Welcome to the IPA Threshing Help Floor. This is your host, Kasey Baptiste. I am taking over from Bishop Esther Baptiste, who could not be here with us today. Today we will be going into another session of IPA Threshing Floor Helpline. Now, I encourage you to send in your messages and your texts, your queries, questions. If you're the helpline, you can also tune into Hope 103.1 FM, DJ Sabi at the back of us. You can also join the stream via the House of Prayer Sanctuary IPA at the Facebook page of International Pentecostal Assembly Grenada. You can join us there. You can also send messages personally to Bishop Esther Baptiste at 417-6415. You can also call the hotline 403-1031. This is your IPA Threshing Flow Helpline, and we are live. Today we have a special guest, one that is familiar to us. We know her. She has been around IPA for quite a while, and she has been one of our family members for quite a period of time. Her name is Andrea Rapier, and today we will introduce her so that she can just give us a brief introduction of who she is and what we will be speaking of today. Andrea, you're live.
Hi, Kasey. Thanks for having me, and thank the bishop when you see her and the IPA family for their trust in the value that I can bring to this program today. So I am Grenadian born, attended AHS, and migrated swiftly thereafter. I've lived overseas for many years and I've returned to Grenada because I think it's going to take all of us, locals and diaspora, to build a nation, and I came back to do my part. I am currently the CEO of Talk Education. It's an education innovation company, and we are developing both pedagogy and technology to change education the way it's done so that it could be holistic, relevant, and customized for students to prepare them for the future, which is now. I'm also the vice president of GARP, Grenada Association for Retired Persons, for citizens 50 and older, so that our aging Grenadians can still have opportunities to add value to our community and also to receive services from the organization as they become less capable of doing so. And I am the chairman and founder of the Shift Caribbean, and the Shift is designed to accelerate socioeconomic development by eliminating constraints and normalizing progress and prosperity in Grenada and hopefully in the region. And we do so by providing support to other NGOs who are not able to really get to a strategic operational level so that they can achieve the goals that they've set out to. So we work as facilitators and supporters for other NGOs within Grenada currently. And so that's me in a nutshell. I'm a mother of 6 and very proud to be that. It's probably my greatest achievement yet. And just really happy to be able to bring my experience and expertise to the program today, talking about sexual violence and abuses that's currently epidemic actually in our Caribbean community. And for us here in Grenada, we need to begin to eradicate this specific challenge because it has an impact on our future generations. It's our young children that are suffering, and we need to be able to give them the future that they deserve to have, and just the value of human life, really elevating that and helping abusers and victims, because abusers are victims themselves. So let's talk about it.
Great, great, great. So thank you for being here with us, Andrea, yet again. So as we move forward into this discussion, Andrea would be portraying some of her knowledge to us about sexual offenders, sexual offense, and crimes. So there are several topics that we'll be discussing today. And as I said earlier on, you can tune in to the hotline via 103.1 Hope FM. You can also join via the IPA Grenada International Facebook page, and you can call in to send in your messages and your comments via the hotline. It will be all the information will be displayed on the screen. So if you forget or you have missed the early session, you can also use that. So first, you will start with some of the questions for you, Andrea. This topic that we're going to discuss today: sexual offenders, crimes, and protection for women and girls. So first, we want to know something more about offenders. Offenders, the power and control mechanisms over these victims. What can we do to help control or help to give these victims a certain level of power, or even those that have not been victimized? How can we give them a certain level of power over sexual offenses and sexual crimes?
Well, that's a loaded question. And so I'm going to take a very simple, practical approach to that. And we have to look at sexual offenses from both the abuser, the offender, and from the victim perspective, and not get lost on one end of the spectrum, because services are needed for both. And so let's just start with victimization, prevention of victimization, because prevention is really the best medicine and the best solution. So in looking at prevention, we have to look at what's creating the vulnerability. How are we vulnerable, or how does a child become vulnerable to sexual abuse? Well, we can start by just simply saying a lack of adult supervision, caring, balanced, healthy adult supervision, and having children exposed to individuals who would victimize them. And so those of us adults who are responsible for the safety and care of children. And I think if you are around children in any form, whether they're your children or not, whether you're a teacher, whether you happen to be at the park when the student is there, whether you happen to be at the beach when a child is there, as an adult with children in your environment, you should be protective. You know, if you see a child walking by themselves in the street, pause and ask, where's the adult? Because sometimes a child is walking so far away from the adult, you're unsure of who the child is with. And what if the child is lost, right? So you want to be able to intercept victimization. We have a challenged socioeconomic community. So we understand that responsible parents must work, they must leave their children in other care, and that you can't always know who to trust and who not to trust. But I will speak now as a mother, versus a paraprofessional, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So as a mother, very early, I began to have the conversations with my children about protecting and taking care of themselves. Not specifically going into detail about abuses and what could happen to them, because you don't want it to be fear-driven. You want them to have a perspective that the world is a beautiful place, supportive of who they are and who they're becoming, and that they can have beauty and happiness in their life. So it's not fear-driven, but you want to teach children to simply take care of themselves. And part of that is recognizing vulnerabilities and avoiding vulnerable opportunities. And so in doing so as a mom, teaching that to my children, one of the first things I've taught them, in my mind, I know I'm specifically targeting certain things. So when I targeted sexual abuse in my instruction for them, what I instructed them to do is, when you're uncomfortable with a person, I want you to let me know immediately. Any level of discomfort, I don't want you to question yourself. I don't want you to intellectualize it. I don't want you to make excuses in your mind. We don't want cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance for the benefit of our users, is basically looking at the truth, but afraid to confront it for what it really is and making excuses for that. And so if it's black, it's black. If it's white, it's white, right? And so giving the children the opportunity to be the judges of their own safety and to be the guardians and stewards of that, being able to pay attention to people and environments, and when you feel vulnerable, pausing and paying attention to why you feel that way. And you justifiably have the authority to protect yourself. Because you're a child does not mean you don't have any sense, doesn't mean that you don't know when you feel safe or unsafe. And so empowering a child to be able to be that porter and have that voice to say, I am uncomfortable with this person or in this environment. So what I have said to my children is, my role as a mom, if you say that you are uncomfortable with a person or in an environment, is to ensure that you do not re-engage it. You don't have to explain it to me. Sometimes children can't articulate what they're feeling, but they feel unsafe. Once you indicate to me that you're feeling unsafe, this is why I jump in and become protective, and I must judge the situation and the environment and make changes immediately so that you feel safe. And there is no validation needed from the child. They don't have to prove to me that they're unsafe. All they have to do is verbalize that they feel unsafe. And I think that is something that, as parents, as teachers, as adults responsible for children in your environment, that you need to give children the opportunity to be the judge of their own safety. Because a child will tell you, I feel uncomfortable around this person, uncle this or auntie that. Okay, then we won't be engaging them. And if we can't avoid them, I will be right beside you, a foot away maximum. But most cases, I can create an avoidance there. So that's primary, listening to children and giving them that free space to be able to communicate with you at all times about how they're feeling and what they're experiencing. Another thing that we do is we make children develop relationships where they may not naturally do so. And by that, I mean, we have relatives and friends that come to our house and we force the children, oh, come kiss auntie this, come kiss auntie that, come wave, hug goodbye, come say goodnight, come. Yeah, I understand courtesy, that they must learn courtesy and good manners. At the same time, the child's body is sovereign and belongs to them. So as an adult, no one can force me to hug, embrace, or kiss someone that I don't want to. We shouldn't force a child to do that. Because we need subconsciously to send this message to the child that you own your body, you're responsible for protecting it, and I am here to engage with that ownership that you have. I am here to partner with you to make sure that I do everything I can to protect you. So you have a right to say, no, I'm not hugging or kissing this person goodbye or hello. I'm not sitting in this person's lap. I don't care who they are. Or I don't want a gift from that person. I don't care what they bring. Allow a child the freedom to be sovereign because they are. So that's sort of addressing the prevention of, and starting with children. I want to start there. And the adult mindset that children don't know. It's not true. Children know. They may not be able to articulate, but they know. And so respect that and give them the space to be sovereign and to be as important. Their voice is as important as yours in the home because they are part of your home and they're valuable. So with that said, now, if you create that kind of environment for the child, you as a parent, you as a responsible adult still need to pay attention and have just guidelines for how you engage people and how you allow your children to engage people and how people are engaged in your home. So not just anybody can come and enter the bedroom. Their friends aren't allowed to come and go play in the bedroom unless I've qualified them to be able to do that and my children are comfortable with that. And even when they do that, the door is open because you can also have abuses of children abusing other children. And we may not call it abusing, but it is, except that that's not the intent. They're simply sometimes role playing and they may not exactly understand that this is long-term damaging behavior. But still, we need to be porters and stewards of the environments that we're in. And our homes should not be an open, free-for-all revolving door where people just come and go when we have children in our home, right? I know we're in situations sometimes where relatives need to live with us for whatever reason. Oh, you need to look at it beyond the need of that relative living with you to what is the impact of that relative in my home. I would love to help, but what is the impact on my children? How much space are they taking? Are my children going to be sleeping in the living room while they have my children's bed? What's the impact of that on my children's safety and sense of well-being? So we may look externally and it looks safe, but the child's sense of well-being is important. And not just important to this moment, but in who they're becoming and their sense of well-being in the world. That's formed now. In the early years, the engagement and the relationship with the world emotionally hinges on foundationally what's happening in their younger years. And they just carry that into adulthood. You want to interject here, or should I keep going?
Good point, Andrea. And I totally agree, because most times we tend to determine vulnerability with innocence, but not necessarily. It does not necessarily mean that because you're innocent means you're most vulnerable, because there are a lot of grown people who are also sexually abused by many. So that comes to a second point here, which says, what about sex offenders? What about how those sex offenders would approach um, somebody who is vulnerable, and the level of vulnerability that we as humans have these days,
Yeah.
as it relates to those sex offenders?
Mm-hmm.
How vulnerable are we to these sex offenders, and what should we do? What conditions would influence how vulnerable we are as
Right.
humans?
Mm-hmm.
Poverty, the economy. What are these things? What are some of these factors that would influence how vulnerable we are as humans, and how can we mend those vulnerabilities?
Okay. Now, I know you mentioned the big one, right? Poverty, our socioeconomic situation in the Caribbean, in Grenada, makes us vulnerable to all kinds of abuses, because people will be people, and hurting people hurt other people. And poverty can bring with it certain desperations and situations and frustrations that money could alleviate. The Bible says money answers all things. And sometimes we don't have answers because we don't have money. And that creates other cycles of behaviors and other problems in society that we would be able to avoid should we throw money at it, so to speak. But it's not the only answer. That's the big one. But I sort of like to be really practical and enter where people live right in that moment, in what can I do right now? Tomorrow morning when I wake up, how can I change my behavior? How can listening to this show impact me right here, right now? Right? So yes, we have. So before I kind of explore the socioeconomic issue deeper, I would just want to say this. We are all vulnerable to negative experiences. We're not all vulnerable to sexual abuse, because offenders have patterns. Sexual offenders have patterns. They first of all, they're not giants. They're not the big bad wolf. They're human people with their own vulnerabilities, but they have patterns that they look for, and they have patterns in their behavior. And so learning those patterns will help us all avoid vulnerable situations. And that's to do with anything. And so a sex offender is not looking for someone who is confident, someone who looks like they can defend themselves, someone who is among other people where they would be outnumbered, right? They're not looking to perform this abuse where they can be caught, because ultimately they're also cowards, right? So they want the gratification, they want to feed this impulse, but they're also cowards. And so for us, adults and children, and this is something that we have to teach the children, is that we have to first understand that that person is a coward, and I have the opportunity to control whether or not I am vulnerable. I am not automatically vulnerable. I can put myself in situations to become vulnerable, or I can end up in a situation unbeknownst to me, that I become vulnerable. So I take a really simple one. I'm walking late at night, male or female. We used to be able to say female, but now it's male or female. Walking late at night in areas that are not so populated and where there aren't people about that are seeing you as a passerby. So you're alone in an isolated space. You are vulnerable to some form of abuse, should there be an abuser within your space that you may not even know, right? So one of the things that I do, that I've taught my children and that I teach women, I'm a personal development coach and I work with women, I work with men. I teach women and children, use your body as your greatest weapon. So if you're in a vulnerable situation and you're being attacked, don't assume because you don't have a cutlass or a gun that you can't do anything. If you weigh 100 pounds, you have 100-pound weapon at your disposal to utilize, right? And so there, learn self-defense. Start kicking, screaming, hitting, biting, but fight your way out, and don't stop fighting until you're free to run. And I can't really go through the details of that on the show, but I can give you just a few pointers that needs no demonstration. If you have keys, when I walk at night and I travel to Europe, I travel to the United States frequently. So I walk at night in big cities. I walk in New York City at 3 a.m. in the morning alone. I do know what to do in those situations, and I know where to not go. But one of the things that I do is I walk with my keys in my hand, with my car key pushed between my index finger and my middle finger. Why? So that when I throw a punch, there's a piece of metal coming with it. Because my keys are a weapon. I wear large rings on my finger. There's a reason for that, while the front of my rings are big pieces of silver. So that when I throw a punch, it increases my impact. I've taught the same thing to my children. And so when my daughter buys rings, she buys rings that have a large head for that reason, right? You're wearing a belt, that's a weapon. So your shoes, that's a weapon. Your handbag, that's a weapon. And so there are things that you can do to get yourself out of situations, even if you find yourself smack in the middle of a threat. So let's kind of drift from that for a minute. If you know that you're in a community, and in Grenada, we do have some situations, but then get yourself in an environment where there are other people with you, and be smart. So don't go out and drink to the point where you are not in cognitive control, that you're not conscious of your moments, that you're not conscious of your own behavior and who's around you. You want to always be able to respond to anything in the environment. And so enjoy yourself with limitations and restraints so that you can be a good steward and guardian of your own life. And so these are practical things that you could do right here, right now, no money needed to do it. Now, if we step up to the socioeconomic issues, and I will touch on this, and some of my listeners may find that I'm going to be a little bit blunt here, but those of us that are single moms, and I'm a single mom, I'm divorced, you do have a choice on how you heal your economic lack in your family. You do have a way, you do have methods and means in which you can provide for your family without compromising, utilizing relationships that will make you and your children vulnerable to be able to make ends meet. So we don't need the boyfriend just because he's paying the bill. And then next thing we find out that he's also been abusing one of your children, boy or girl, or abusing you. Why settle for abuse to solve an issue of money? You are so much more valuable than money. And I know if people would think it's easy to say that when you have money and you don't, and you know where your next meal is coming from. I have been in situations where I didn't know where the next meal is coming from. I've been there. All right. And since this is an IPA station, I'm going to go down the vein of what the demographic of our listeners. God is our all supplier. He is Jehovah Jireh, at the source of all things good. And every gift that he gives you comes without sorrow to it. And he will supply all your needs according to his riches in glory by Christ Jesus. So getting ourselves in compromising situations to be able to make ends meet is really a lack of faith. It's fear and a lack of faith because we are afraid that we will not be able to provide. And so we take the easiest way out. But if God decides to wait 6 hours to meet your need, it means that you had 6 hours to wait. Don't take the shortcut and go for something in 3 hours that leaves you abused or your children abused. Right? We have to begin to live a bigger, better life. And a bigger, better life begins with who we are being in the soul and who we are being as people and how we are valuing ourselves and looking at our lives through heaven's perspective. Through heaven's perspective, we're not alone. God will provide for us. God will protect us, but we participate in that. We participate in that, and it's going to take faith for us to stand when there's nothing, knowing that He's faithful and He will perform what He has promised, and He has promised that we will not lack any good thing. And just holding out for that to happen and being cautious about where we lean to be able to meet those needs and calm those fears.
I agree. And that also brings us to one point that one of our viewers shared, Dottie Buckmeyer, where she said, true money is one of the main reasons why lots of young girls get used and abused. And sadly, sometimes the mother and sometimes are the ones who are allowing it to happen to those children because of poverty and the lack thereof. So that comes back to the point of compromise. Sometimes we feel like we need to compromise, we need to go an extra mile just so that we can get our children fed or that we can get our needs met, when we are really putting ourselves in a loophole where we're becoming extra vulnerable to these sorts of abuses, specifically sexual abuse.
Yes,
And
yes.
something that is very prominent in the world today, specifically in the Caribbean, and sometimes in our very homes, in our very backyards, right next to us, our neighbors. So we really need to be mindful of these things. And I think that point, Andrea, that you brought forward is a very, very crucial point that we should all pay attention to.
Let me, before you do that, I want to just, you made a comment, and it's very important to go back to what Dottie said. We also make the mistake in our community that whatever is happening in a neighbor's house is their business outside of gossip, right? So we will know of, like Dottie just said, we will know of, it's basically prostitution, right? The leader of this family, the head of this household, is aware of and encouraging, I've heard of situations like that as well, the young woman or young man to compromise for economic means. And we will gossip about that, but we won't participate in correcting it. We won't participate in healing it. We won't participate in recovering. We won't participate in helping this young woman or in helping this mother or in helping this family, whoever's responsible in the decision making, nor will we report it to the authorities. People will do whatever works. So when an individual knows that I could violate another person and there's no consequence, they're going to do it. When a mother knows that she can prostitute her daughter and no one is going to say anything to the authorities, no one's going to care what's happening to the girl, she's going to do it. We have to all take responsibility beyond gossip. Gossip is very damaging. How about we become the solution? How about a conversation? We are so afraid to engage people in a real way in our community and to confront issues that need to be confronted. And unfortunately, we are a shame-based society. And so we do not take kindly to people stepping into our lives to bring correction or reproof or even instruction, because we assume that they think they're better than we are, that they think they're smarter. We assume that it's insulting, and we take a shame approach to it versus an approach of gratitude for the development opportunity, for the growth opportunity. But it's time for us to get in each other's business for real. It's time for us to stop talking about the problem and become the solution to the problem. So engaging the family, engaging the young woman and finding out what's happening in her life, And I'm talking about doing this from a sense of really wanting to help, not being nosy so you get more information to gossip, but really looking at what's happening in the community and saying, you know what, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem. I can contribute here. Let me do that. It could be a listening ear to be able to help this mom navigate and find solutions other than the path that she's contemplating or that she's exhausting. But it's time for all of us, 110,000 people, we can have a utopia on this island. Grenada can sustain its own population. Our land can sustain us. It's proving that our land can sustain us. But we must sustain our life's quality. We must sustain our development. We must be the initiators of our own healing as a country and as a people. And we have to get involved. I'm nosy. And so I go in and I ask questions. You know, I saw two kids walking up the road and their knees were bigger than their thighs. It was the middle of the day when they should be in school. I stopped and I asked, sweetheart, where's your mom? Where's your dad? Where do you live? Why aren't you in school? And the child said, one of the children said, we're not in school because we had nothing to eat today. So mom kept us home. So where's your mom? Could you go get your mom for me? So they went, they got their mother, they brought her back, and she and I had a conversation, and she was happy to have someone listening. She shared what was going on, and I offered the help that I could provide to that family. And yeah, did the help I provide sustain them for the next 10 years? No. But it gave her relief for a few days. It gave her time to breathe. It relieved some stress so she could think better, so she could do better. And it's just sometimes we think that what we have to offer is so small to the big problem that we're looking at that we don't even contribute the little that we have. But 5 loaves and 2 fish fed a multitude. Imagine if that little boy said, you know what, I don't have enough for everybody, so I'm just gonna go eat my food in a corner somewhere. Over 5,000 people would have been hungry. Whatever is in your hand, whatever moment you're witnessing, whatever problem you're in front of, I think you're empowered to solve it, which is why God has you there. So step in and become involved before there's crisis where you're going to stand on the sideline. Because every single problem that we have in our community, be it sexual abuse or other, every problem in our community impacts every one of us. We don't have a section of the community that can live high and mighty and sustain that for the next 50 years, while this other section here is rotting and decaying. It's going, all the roosters will come home to nest when the sun goes down. They know which tree belongs to them. So there is an impact to all of us, and we will eventually pay for it individually and as a community if we don't all take responsibility now for change. And I was looking at some statistics on sexual abuse, and I think it was like 3 out of 10. That's a high number. It's almost a third of our population would have a history of sexual abuse in some way, or some sexual violation, whether it's inappropriate touch at work, and a lot of that is happening. So co-workers who see that a young woman is being touched or verbally sexually harassed, and then you turn off back to your desk, and then you whisper to another co-worker, and you never take action to defend her, to protect her, and to bring correction to the situation, you are responsible for the problem that we have in our community. Because when perpetrators know that someone's paying attention, they restrain themselves. So the fastest way to eradicate sexual abuse is that all of us get involved in speaking, in showing up, in helping out, in reporting, in facilitating change. It's going to take all of us, and if we all do our little part, we will have a revolution of change very, very quickly in these areas that we have social challenges in the country.
Great points, Andrea. Great points. Great points. And that also leads us to the next question. But before we go into the question, we just want to remind the viewers this is the IPA Threshing Helpline, and today we are discussing sexual crimes and offenses against women. You can also join us through Hope FM, that's 103.1 FM. You can also join us on the IPA Grenada Facebook page. The stream is linked there. You can join there and share your comments, share your views, You can also call in to the hotline, DJ Sabi, and you can get some more information here about this topic that we are discussing here. This number for the helpline is 403-1031. DJ Sabi. So, Andrea, great point so far. We've been going pretty good with this discussion. Again, my name is Kasey Baptiste, and I'm taking over for Bishop Esther Baptiste, who could not be here today. Just want to say shout out to all the members of the House of Prayer Sanctuary, Mardi Gras. Shout out to Prayer of Faith Sanctuary. Shout out to Living Water Sanctuary. Shout out to Agape Ministries. Shout out to Shayna Cruikshank of Mardi Gras House of Prayer Sanctuary. Shout out to Jennifer Cato of the House of Prayer Sanctuary. Shout out to Michelle Forsyth of the Aperture Pentecostal Lighthouse. We show that these viewers are here. They are very consistent every week, and they also play a very vital role in the progression of this IPA helpline. So shout out to them. Shout out to all of you viewers. Again, you can call in to send your comments and your questions at 403-1031. You can also leave a comment on Facebook via the IPA Grenada Facebook page. Sorry. So here again we are with Andrea Rapier, our life coach. We're discussing the topic of sexual offenders and sexual abuse. We'll continue with this conversation here. So Andrea, I know we discussed some of the prevention methods earlier on. You discussed some of the prevention methods, ways that we can prevent ourselves from being so vulnerable from these sexual attackers and sexual offenders. So can we go into a little bit more depth with that? Some more of these prevention methods that we can use to alleviate, at least solve some of these economic or socioeconomic problems like sexual abuse. What are your views on that?
We can't talk about prevention without talking about the abusers themselves. And nobody wakes up in the morning and bam, they become an abuser. It's progressive. It begins with a thought. For some people, it begins with their own abuse. They will abuse themselves. With some people, they were exposed to something, and that opened the door to deeper thought and to, at some point, committing the thought into action to actually violate another person. Whatever the reason that gets an abuser there, they are among us, and they are people that we love. In all reality, right? Every abuser is a child of a parent. In most cases, the sibling of a brother or sister. In a lot of cases, the parent of a child, the friend of someone's neighbor. So we love the offenders. They are people among us, and we love the people that are our people. And sometimes we don't even know that in that person is disguised an abuser. Or sometimes we witness behavior that we don't consider to be abusive because of our cultural conditioning. Either way, prevention cannot happen unless we engage the abusers as well. And reporting abuse, we see that only from the criminal perspective, which is a lot of times why we don't report it. But we need to also look at it from the growth and change perspective. When we report that violation and that person faces criminal action for their choices, for their violation, for their victimization of another person, what they also have access to is social services, an opportunity for change and growth on an individual level. And so we need to see that reporting sexual abuse is not just about the criminality of it. It's about change. Change for the criminal and change for the victim and change for the family and change for the community, change for the nation on a socioeconomic level. So we look at our abusers as monsters, and there is a little monster in all of us. And when we have the opportunity, that monster comes out. But we also need to look at them as needing help. not without criminal action. I am an advocate for justice. I'm an advocate for having a justice system that fiercely punishes sexual assault and incest. At the same time, that in itself does not solve the problem because the person can't stay in jail forever. So when they are out of jail, what happens next? They become a repeat offender because that's what's in them. They need the opportunity to change their choices, which needs to begin with changing mindset. And so, along with criminal action, must be the marriage of self development, a journey that this perpetrator can begin when they engage legal action, so that when they are back in society, they are not repeated offenders. And for those of us who are in environments with people who we know have offended, we need to take the responsibility of becoming the guardian angels in those situations so that if we see them alone with someone that could be vulnerable, we step in. Sometimes just showing up and sitting down could prevent an abuse. Sometimes turning off the television and paying attention to your kids can prevent abuse. Sometimes meeting the boyfriend outside, not bringing him home, could prevent abuse. So I'm going back again. It's a holistic approach to prevention. It's a holistic approach to recovery. It's a holistic approach to healing. It must involve the abuser as well, because they need services to be able to prevent. I think education is important in preventing abuse. Talking about it and beginning in school. At home with parents, we need to talk about it. We need to tell kids how to protect themselves, what to look for, and how to prevent vulnerability. And life is not 100% proof, right? Nothing is. Adam took care of that. But we could do the best that we can at that. And giving children and young people the opportunity, the knowledge to be able to feel empowered to protect themselves. I think one of the things that should be, and parents, I know we can't always afford it, but communities can come together and do this. It could be done in schools, that young people, male and female, need to learn self-defense. They need to learn how to protect themselves. And so there's a program called Kid in Power that I've used with my children, that and they practice with each other how to defend yourself, how to fight out of a situation, how to alert other people, how to talk about it, how to recognize a vulnerable situation and prevent it. So these are things that we've done together and we continue to do so that we're equipped and we're current and we can respond. And the thing is that perpetrators tend to look for the person who lacks confidence and for the person who is unaware that they could be vulnerable. That's who they're looking for. They're not random. They specifically select, and when I talked earlier about patterns, they specifically select a type, a profile of person that they can victimize. And some of them will even, and I'm saying this from the men's perspective now, there are men who would admit that they, and this has been done in the United States and studies and so on, that they dated the mom so that they could abuse the child. They met the mom, saw the child, wanted the child, so they dated the mom to get the confidence, to get the trust, so they have access to the child. So these are, if we are aware of the possibilities, then we could become more diligent with prevention. So we need to think, we need to look at reality, and we need to think through the fact that, yeah, we're safe in Grenada compared to a lot of places in the world, but we do have the issue of sexual abuse, and all of us have responsibility. And as a mom, as a teacher, as a father, and for those of you listening who, and we don't know, we're hoping everybody who's listening is not an abuser. We're hoping that, right? But let's just assume this is falling on the air of a person who is. If you are an abuser out under my voice and you're hearing what I'm saying, I'm going to ask you a couple questions to ask yourself. Ask yourself, is it okay? And what gives you the right to hurt another person? Ask yourself, why? What is it in me that's craving that? And how do I stop myself? Where do I get help? Because the consequence of sexual abuse is long term. The impact on the adult who is abused as a child, the impact on the woman who is raped, it all has a long term impact, which I'm not going to get through this, into the psychology of that. But we are affecting people's life. We're affecting their self perspective, their self image, their self worth. We're affecting their career. We're affecting their ability to make money. We're affecting how they approach future relationships and how they parent. It's destructive. And so, if you are a perpetrator, I want to challenge you to confront yourself and seek help. And I highly recommend just go to social services or call a psychologist or psychiatrist, but get help from a trusted source where you can admit what is happening and you can take steps forward.
Good points. Good points. And that's just from a perpetrator's point of view. One viewer was asking, well, mainly just so for the sexual witnesses, what do you think, or what do you do if you try to speak up and help someone that is being sexually abused and they are cursed, or they curse you rather, and you are out to do and still try to help them, or just walk away? Do you just walk away or try to help them?
Okay, so the question, let me just read the question. What do you do? Or you spoke to the person to try to help and the person cussed you out. Well, this will depend. This will depend on if you suspect it and you are in the inquiry stages. And there's so many people that are afraid of the truth when the truth is negative. And people tend to feel like when you are a witness to their vulnerability, you're a witness to their failure. So the victim also feels like they were wrong when they're victimized. It's like the person who is conned. If someone cons you, it's very hard to admit it because that means you're kind of saying that you were gullible and you don't want to send that message. And it's the same thing. So sort of be understanding of why it is that the person doesn't even want to hear it, because it hurts. It hurts that you know the secret. It hurts that you know that they are being abused or that someone in their home is being abused. But we do have the law. We have a police department and we have laws in our country to protect people from sexual abuse. So if you know about sexual abuse, call the police. Because if you do nothing, you are a contributor. Okay? So if you brought it forward to the person and they don't want to hear it, give them some time and try to go back. Try to go back to them in another angle or find someone close to them that you can say, hey, I would like to know how to approach this person. And if you can't approach it, hey, sometimes you just have to call the police. Call the police and say, hey, here's what I suspect is going on. I'm leaving that to you all. But that's my civic responsibility to report the abuse that I witnessed. And now let them take over. And then you can walk away with your hands clean because you've done your part. And for people who are in that home, keep an ear and an eye open. Continue to be kind. Continue to be generous with that person. Eventually, they may come and open up to you and volunteer that information. Or maybe you can be there for when that child needs someone to talk to and to tell. Then you can be a listening ear. Just don't broadcast it. That's the worst thing to do. Don't go broadcast it. Work in an environment of trust with selected people and get someone involved who has the authority, the police, social services, to engage this family and let them deal with it.
I agree. Mute. Muted. I agree, and sometimes most of the viewers or most people who are involved in these situations or witness these situations, they sometimes feel like, okay, well, the police may not do anything, or this person may not respond in the way that would be positively impacting the situation or the victims involved in the situation. So what do we do then? Do we keep trying to get the message out, keep trying to involve people in authorities, or do we just sit back and say, you know what, this is not my business, I've tried my best, but the persons just do not want to, involve anyone in or the authorities into the situation? Like, what do we do in that situation? How do we impact the situation in that sense?
I say begin with social services. You don't want to get the police involved, but you can't just turn your head. You can't pretend it away because someone needs protection, obviously. So contact social services and let them be the ones to determine what happens next, and then take yourself out of it. And you should be able to do that anonymously. It's not something that requires you to put your name out. So just as long as you're not turning your back on this family, as long as you're not turning your back on the situation and taking no action at all, because all of us can put up a front. The abuser could curse you out. You may not know that that's the abuser, but the abuser could curse you out and then deter you with fear and walk away. And now they get to run free in the life of this child or this person, this woman, this man, this boy. So call social services. Begin with that and let them determine whether or not the police needs to be involved. There are professionals in our country. And I think here in Grenada, there are a number of organizations that specifically work with sexual abuse. We do have a special victims unit that specifically deals with sexually related crimes. And I think we should give them the opportunity to do their job. We need to report it. At the end of the day, reporting is critical for any intervention to begin.
I agree. And another important thing to note is that when it is reported, it will be advised for the reporter to sit back and let the law take its course. Because a lot of times, sometimes we tend to try to get too deeply involved in a situation like that, and we claim that we want to help or we want to assist the situation, when really and truly we have already done enough. The police and the persons of the authorities, they are already involved in the situation and trying to maneuver the situation in a way that would be helpful to the victims and the families. So at that point, we need to remember that the law and the police force, they know all that they need to do in terms of coping with a situation like that. So from at that point, we need to know that just trust in them and to let them do what they have to do and to take their course, let the law take its course. So just a word to our viewers there. So that leads us to the last question, and Andrea, going deeply into this conversation is very intriguing, and I'm pretty sure that all of viewers will share the same sentiment. As it relates to the church on a whole, what are some of the things that we as the church can do to help promote this solution or any solution to sexual abuse? How can we promote solutions to the sexual abuse? But before we take that, we just have one caller in. So we'll take that caller before we take you, Andrea. Good evening, caller, you're live. How can we promote solution? Good evening, caller, you're live.
Hi, good afternoon.
Hi.
I've been listening to the program and I have a question. I'm not sure if somebody asked or if this was discussed already, and I really apologize for my noisy background because I'm somewhere where it's not too quiet, but I just want to ask the question. Like I've been observing, me being a Christian per se, I've been observing like remarks by Christians and, people who claim that they are followers of Christ, the way they would treat persons, like, for example, who are homosexuals. And a lot of times when I speak to certain people like lesbians or gays, it's because they have encountered sexual abuse at a young age. So it's like they have a hatred for the opposite sex. So it's like, let's say I just want Miss Rapier's opinion on that. Let's say somebody comes and they want to be a part of a church, and you know that person encountered like some severe sexual abuse and that is what caused them, but they want to be part of a church. I just want to know, like, how would you approach something like that? Like, how would you go about helping that person get out of that or make them feel loved, you know? Because I really believe that the church has, I would say, a major part to play in actually assisting people like that. But a lot of times we tend to condemn them and make them look like, okay, they're the worst and are the worst sin. So I just want to know, and as I said earlier, it's because of encounter of sexual abuse. A lot of times persons become lesbians and gays. So I just want to know, because I think we have a major part to play in actually helping people out of that situation. I hope I was clear.
Interesting comment. Interesting query. Andrea, can you help with that?
Yes. Really good question. Glad you brought that up. I'm going to answer the question, but I want to tell the viewers that the child abuse hotline number is 677. 677. So that will include if there's sexual abuse, right? Any abuse of child, 677. There are other numbers, but you can find that online as well. If you just Google that, child abuse hotline or sexual abuse hotline in Grenada, and the information will pop up. Okay, so let's get to that. I would first say that if we take someone's sexuality out of the picture, the church is for all people. Jesus said, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all people," right? So the church is the body of Christ, and all of us are under construction, and that's our reality. With that said, whoever walks in the door, the space belongs to them to walk in and to sit and to follow the protocol and decorum of the environment that they're in, and to honor that. And as long as a person is doing that, whatever their private life is, that's none of our business. We don't decide, because we did not die for the church. Christ died for the church. He died for the liar. He died for the thief. He died for the gossiper. He died for the person involved in voodoo. He died for the person who's homosexual. He died for the sex offender. It is Christ that died, and it is his church, and he will present his church faultless, without spot or blemish, to himself. And so all of us are under construction, so we do not eliminate anyone because Christ hasn't done so. Now, I understand also that within church administration, there are restrictions on the lifestyle that is accepted to function in leadership and in church administration. And everywhere else in the world, whether it's church or if it's corporate, if it's secular, organizations have a right to define who they accept as employees and as volunteers and as leaders and administrators of their organization. The church is no different on an organizational level. And when I say the church, I mean the local church, the Baptist church, the Pentecostal church, right? Because we need to define exactly what the church is. The church is the body of Christ. That's everyone who has placed their faith in Jesus Christ as Lord and believe that God has raised him from the dead. That's who shall be saved. So those of us who name Christ, we are the church. These organizations, these denominations in which we choose to worship and what's comfortable for us, that is not the church, right? These are organizations in which people gather that are part of the church to worship and to fellowship and to have camaraderie. Now, with that said, the church, the body of Christ, is open to all. And since neither of us died for it, neither of us control it or decide or get to judge who it is that enters and who it is that exits. It is Christ that died. Simultaneously, in the organization of the denominations, they can make the rules on their leadership and their administration. But if you name Christ as an organization, then the homosexual should be able to walk in, sit down, and feel loved. Because it is by God's love and kindness that he drew us to himself. So if we do not give love to others, they will not see Christ and they will not be drawn to him. So in essence, we are repelling people from the beauty that Christ is by not giving them love. The same way that if God is angry with us, it repels us. And he isn't angry. He loves us with an everlasting love, always calling us to himself. And we tend to think that by punishing people or excommunicating them, that's how we force them into conformation of what we want them to become. It is the opposite. It is by loving people and bringing them close that they want to be and become the best of themselves that they were born to be, which is very deep within them and blossoms by love. So that's the standard of God. That's the standard of the Bible, and that's the standard by which I guide myself and my profession and my personal life. And that is my hope, that as a Christian community, that we will, first of all, take that approach. So we love the sex offender, and we also love the victim. We love the perpetrator. We love the victim. We don't condone the behavior, but we love the person. And we are there to go ye into the world and baptize, preaching and baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And God will back up his word, confirming it by the Holy Spirit with signs following, so those people can experience real change. Real change, the change that comes when Christ touches your life and the Holy Spirit make all things new and conforms you to the image of the Son of God. That's where real change is. This is what makes a sex offender become new again. This is what restores the innocence of a child that's been abused. This is what brings us to our right mind. This is what gives us hope in hopelessness. This is what gives us light when there's darkness. So that's the message of the gospel, and that's where we need to stay no matter what we do. Now, the role of the church in dealing with the community issue of sexual abuse, we have to come out of the closet and not be afraid to say what needs to be said. A lot of people have actually been abused in church. And again, I'm talking about the organizational structures. A lot of people have been abused in church by youth ministers, by pastors, I can go on, and still being abused. So when the pastor who is married is hitting on the 15-year-old, that's abuse. Whether he slept with her or not, that's emotional abuse. Okay? And so we have a responsibility as the church to represent Jesus. And if we look at his life, we see him going into all the dark corners and bringing light, not judgment, not condemnation, light and love. He brought truth. And as long as the church takes a position of the truth, we will be able to bring change to the socioeconomic and all the challenges that we're experiencing in our communities. We are the change agents. We're the ones that do it. And so the church engaging this conversation and the church being able to bring healing and to this specific problem, one is to be more protective of children in our congregations. We put people working in children's ministry that we haven't done a background check on, that we haven't gotten references for. They want to volunteer in church, and we're happy to have somebody doing the job. And so we take them and we put them in situations where other people become vulnerable to their lack of growth and maturity and responsibility in these different areas of their lives, whether it's sexual or whether it's just verbally abusive as a leader, or whether it's economic abuse. The church has a responsibility to be stewards of the souls in it. And therefore, when we take volunteers, we need to examine these people, get references in the community, talk to people and find out who they really are before we put them with other people and make people vulnerable to them and their issues. And we also need to look realistically at the social issues and begin to deal with them from the Word of God. We tend to deal with them when there's a problem, but what we have to do is build people to where they are being transformed daily so that they can begin to become, they can journey into a productive, good citizen. And all the through scriptures, you find Jesus promoting good citizenship. Good citizenship is a result of a life that is Christ-like. When he met his disciples, they were productive, good citizens. And he elevated that. And we see him being a good citizen. Everywhere he went, he contributed. He brought change. He solved problems. He gave grace. And so the church has a responsibility to develop good citizenship among its members. And the church, unfortunately, and when I say that again, I mean the organizations, have actually been hiding places for abuse. And so people have come into church and been abused. And wherever you find pain, you repel. We return to a place of pleasure. It is built within our psychology, in our humanness, to always return to the place of pleasure. So we should make our congregations and our church events and our Sunday morning services a place of pleasure, not a place of sin, but a place of pleasure, because God is a good God. God is a loving God. And when he looks at mankind, he looks at his own reflection, which he has good in mind for. And if we can get people to know that really, really young, I mean, we breathe this into people and we feed them that, not religion, but we feed them Christ, we will transform our society without judgment.
Good points, good points. And as you mentioned the word judgment, I would like to ask one last question before we wrap up. What advice do you have for persons who have been victims of sexual abuse or the sexual offenders themselves after returning to society after such emotional situation or emotional encounter? What advice would you have to give for them?
Okay, so let me put that question disappeared very quickly. It was very long, and I kind of just wanted to look at it again. So if I'm understanding the question, okay, in the event that a child has been sexually abused for the first time and nothing was mentioned about it, and it continues, what advice would you give to the child who has been abused for the first time in terms of making that very first report? How do they make that first step? Because many times we hear children speaking about it after many encounters. Okay, I understand. There are a couple of things that happens here when you're first victimized. It's very confusing, first of all. Even for an adult, it's very confusing. And if you ask a woman who's been abused the first time he hit her, it was kind of like a shock. There was no action plan in her head before the incident, so that when it happened, there's this course of action. Well, a few of us might have an action plan before, but that's not kind of what everybody does, right? Especially in a situation with a child. And when a child is abused, they're usually threatened not to report. So it takes some sorting out of that confusion and that fear and that pain and that sense of reality being shattered and off-centered. It takes some time for a child to sort that before they could decide to actually report it. And I am talking about, it could be a child in a trusted environment where the parents are doing everything right and they're communicative with the child, and the child has the openness to explore their sovereignty and to communicate and to be heard, and action could be taken. Even a child in the best environment may not immediately say something, just like a woman would not immediately say something. This is why, let's take the Me Too movement in the United States. Women are coming forward many years after. Why? Initially, you have to remember that the victim usually blame themselves as well. There's a lot of emotional sorting that needs to be done before a person can step forward to say, I have been victimized. Because it's a self-judgment to be able to say, I have been victimized. It's a self-judgment. It feels that way. And so whenever a person comes forward, I'm just happy. Whether it's the first time or the 100th time, I'm just happy that you came forward. Now, to get the child to say something initially, the first time, you would have to have been teaching this child to be vocal about everything. So a child who is not in an environment where they could just be vocal about whatever they think and whatever they feel without too much of a filter, whether or not in a fair-based environment, that child would be more likely to say something immediately than one who's in an environment where children are seen and not heard. And so we sort of need to look at the culture within our homes. Can the kid just come say whatever they want to say? When you, and I know we don't like our kids talking back, and I don't like it either. At the same time, my children have a right to tell me what's on their mind with respect. So, Mom, you were wrong about that. It wasn't me that did this. It was my brother that did that, or my sister did that. Mom, you said such and such and such, but you didn't do it. You didn't keep your word to me. Children need to be able to say things like that. So they're not going to just jump and tell you the first time someone touched them if they can't tell you the first time they thought you were wrong about something. And another thing is also that not only does a perpetrator sometimes threaten the child, they threaten the child's environment. So if I tell, there's a sequence of actions that follow, and in that sequence, I'm afraid of all the repercussions. And so the child wouldn't tell, not because they don't feel like the parent will believe them. Matter of fact, the parent might just believe them, and the actions that follow, it's a chain reaction, and the child can't handle it. So we're just happy whenever they come forward and be the person that the people around you are safe with, so that when they feel vulnerable or something happens, they can come to you and you can become an agent for change and protection for that person. So it's a posture that you live in. Just live in a posture where you just love people and you're there for them. And then you give them grace to fail and grace to be human. And they'll come tell you things when they really need to tell somebody something, they'll come to you. And then you can give them some good advice, which means that you need to stay up on the times of what's happening in the community and what resources are available so that you can really be of good help.
I totally agree. I totally agree. So, Andrea, for our final discussion for the evening, we just like you to recommend or at least give some form of recommend to victims and to the victimizers alike after returning to society, after um, being part of such an event like sexual abuse
Right.
experiences tragedy.
So, for those of you who are listening that may have been abused or harassed, because abuse have different levels. Sometimes it's verbal abuse, sexual verbal abuse, or it could be down to where you were molested. It does have an impact on your life long term in your becoming. There's no way to avoid that. However, and we know that all things work together for good to them that love the Lord and to those who are called according to his purpose. And so I would have failed if I didn't say to you initially to remember that before you were formed in the belly, God knew you. He saw a whole string of your life forward from conception to your appointment with death and every experience you would have, good or bad. And he still thought that the world needed you enough and that he was capable of the journey he has planned for you in the midst of everything that you were going to experience. So your value in life, your value to God, your value in your community has not been impacted or diminished because of your experience. As a matter of fact, it's been enriched. And so I want you to seek a path for healing. And for everyone is different. For some people, they need therapy. They need to see a counselor. Some people need a coach. Some people need to talk. They need to expose it. They need to have a conversation with their family. Some people need to confront the perpetrator. The person might be old now and you're an adult and you want to say part of your healing journey may be to confront the person and say, you hurt me. But whatever your healing journey is, for some of you, your healing journey may include medication. But whatever your healing journey is, there is a path for healing for you, and you deserve it. You are worth it because you're valuable. You're priceless. And your value was not based on your experiences. Your value was based on your source. You were designed and created like God himself. And the world needed you, and he thought that you were worth it.
Andrea, great points. Great points. So again, we want to say thank you to Andrea for your words of wisdom today. This discussion was very informative, and I'm sure all the viewers would share that same sentiment. Today's topic was sexual offenses and crimes, and how can we protect ourselves from the vulnerability of sexual offenses. Now, this is the IPA Threshing Flow Helpline, and we have come to the end of our discussion today. So again, we want to say thank you to all the viewers. Thank you to everyone who has joined, all the callers, all the person that normally tune in. We want to say big up to DJ Sabi and Hope 103.1 FM. I want to thank you for making this hotline and helpline possible. Now you can join the IPA Threshing Floor Helpline every Thursday on Hope 103.1 FM, every Thursday at 5:45 p.m. Right? So this is the end. We once again thank you to Andrea for joining us today. This is the IPA Threshing Floor Helpline. See you next time.